Hi, my name is Benedict. As per things this time of year, absolutely everything's open, windows, doors, the whole lot, because it's hot in Australia. Somebody was talking about making these sorts of things in some group somewhere or other. Here is me showing that. I'm going to show it on my YouTube. If somebody wants to share it into that space, great. What the conversation seemed to be about was saying, what can we do within reason? And I'm going to take that to be much broader, to say any decent door, to use stock devices to make sort of sound goodifiers, but to make the sort of, people say channel strips. I hate channel strips, I really do. Maybe in part because Reason just has such a good mixer built in, but whatever, we won't go too far into that. But what can we do to put on not only our individual devices, a synth or whatever, and then on buses and masters to give us a nicer, warmer, more engaged, analog-y sound, that less flat digital thing. I've built two tape things. I've called them Reason to let people know that 100% of the devices in here are stock. They are stock for Reason 13. You could make or modify these for earlier versions, but there are a couple of devices in Reason 13 that make it easier, particularly the gain tool. We will see that there's a tape master that, as it suggests, is designed to be used more on buses, and a tape track, which is designed to be used more on tracks. These will obviously require Reason and Reason 13 to function fully. If you've got an earlier version of Reason, they should open, but then you would need to work out how you are going to replace that gain device. You should be on Reason 13, honestly. The improvements are so much better. I bring these in, browser or whatever, look for them, bring them in. Now I bring them in under a shift drag into here, so they are not wired in. This is pretty important for the usability of them. We will take our track and control drag. I'm using Windows. You're going to need to use a Mac shortcut. We will drag that off, keeping the control down, letting go. We now have a copy of this. This is important. Now this is not wired in. See, not wired in. Easy way to wire it in pretty quickly is to shift. Again, this is, you check your Mac version, shift, drag, and see the little target there? You want to make sure the target is there, let go. So, if we listen to this, it's now wired in. If you're running and it's not wired in, these won't go. So it's relatively easy to see. We've got this tape wired in. The difference isn't massive. It shouldn't be massive. We plug into a Neve or an SSL or whatever, and the Neve was the more coloured of the two. The difference is subtle. It has to be subtle. If you go making defaults that are unsubtle, as many sound goodifiers are, then you end up with a mud mix by the time you get to a bus, and then you are just running uphill the whole time, because you don't want to let go of the individual track sound, because it's too... You're not thinking big picture. Big picture means that everything needs to be small to make the final. Listen to what we have as a track. High quality lazy work using some loops, and it is very, very boring, I will tell you once you've listened to it a few times. So we can pull this in and attach that to the track. We won't get into how we can handle the depths for now. Another way that I commonly use this is I'll drag to the bottom of the particular rack that I'm working in. I've got a copy, so that's a control drag. I'll control drag again to the bottom of, and I will commonly put this after any effects that I've used. But you've got to decide how you want your workflow to be. I'm not going to discuss that too much here. Again, we've pulled that, so now that it's in, and this last one, we don't need to do anything but shift drag to there, and now all three are in. This one's bypassed, so if we listen, very bright, very flat, very clean, very clear. Similar, but we've just rounded off some of those very, very clean, clear, what people might configure are brittle sounds. In the headphones, I hear very little difference. On speakers, I can clearly hear it. The bus version is already there, but if it wasn't there, it would be exactly the same routine. Drag in the tape master and shift bing, and then it would be there. Well, we're not going to do that. Obviously, let go of the control. And then we can bring that in. Now, obviously, in an AB, we are hearing quite notable differences. Here, it's not so subtle. So looking at what was done here, pre, post, obviously massive level difference. Yes, because this is essentially a mastering chain. I would normally have it in my mastering, but here I've put it here because it's easier for you to see. My input gain I have left alone. My master comp, the tape stuff is folded up because there's no need to touch it. We'll go over these in the second part of the video. I've decided here to use this compressor. I've set this up the way I always set up a compressor. We'll go through and I'll show you how I do that, because a lot of people don't know how to set up compressors and they use them wrong. A lot of people think of a compressor as simply being a weak Lehmar's limiter, and that's how they set them up for buses and mastering and what have you, and even for original tracks. And believe me, that is not what a compressor really shines at. A compressor is about changing the envelope, or the time envelope, or the amplitude over time of that source. And particularly where you've got a bus, you've got several sources, and this is pulling them together. That is commonly referred to as a glue compressor. Now, this master bus compressor is the one out of the top of the SSL, and that thing is famous. I've heard there's a really good recreation. There's no sonic stuff other than the ballistics throw of the thing. I've heard that it's pretty good. It is pretty good. Now, the way that I always set up a compressor looking for groove is this. I slam it. Threshold as low as it goes, ratio as high as it goes. If you're using something else that has lower threshold, higher ratios, then you might want to stop at a ratio of about 16:1. Sometimes going down to minus 60 or what have you, and on your threshold's okay, but after a certain point you've got silence, so you've got to choose what works. But nonetheless, this is the approach. I will then take my attack, like this is set to as slow as they go, till I find a point where I feel like it's letting not only the transients through, but the real front half of the groove. Now again, I can't hear in cans properly, and I can't remember what the settings were, but I think they were fairly long. And then use this. What we're looking for is groove. Now, while I am generally opposed to chair dancing because it's about your ego, basically you've got your hands down your pants rather than focusing on the material, but you will tend to find there comes a point where you're going, this is funkin' groovin'. So we find that point where we're getting a nice deep biting groove. Very deep, very biting, because we are far too aggressive. I will then pull back my ratio and find the threshold where it feels good. And I'm looking to just impart that overall groove, because remember, this is a bus, in this case it's the master. We want that overall groove on everything. If this were the rhythm bus and then there's going to be a master bus later, while tempting to push really hard at this point, it'll sound great now, but it'll be a nightmare when you come to your masters. It'll never be loud enough. So at this point, I would be looking for about a dB. That's not a hard and fast rule, but that makes sense here, because if we're compressing here and then we're compressing again, say on the masters, then the difference between the two, when we're at the masters, you've effectively multiplied this by something like 10. So if you're dropping a dB here on your compression, as in your compressor's compressing about a dB, then you do that again on your masters, then you've probably got something closer to 10 dB of compression, which if we did this here, it should be hard to do. Okay, now there we are. We'd probably go, dude, that's blasted. But we will tend to do it here and then there and go, why does this not come out sounding right? But because this is my masters, then I'm prepared to go to 3 to 4 dB. Louder, brighter. It's got a more muscular thump and groove to it. Now you'll notice that I have not used the makeup gain. These are set to 0. A downside of this is by default is it adds 5 dB. Dumb decision. Adding 3 dB, maybe. Adding 5 dB, dumb. So just watch that. If you're building anything on your own, watch that a makeup gain is not set. It is fine to lose level at these points. It really is. So that's that. And then just a case of finding the EQ curve. A bit too bright. Remember, this kind of material, bomb squaddy, Public Enemy kind of stuff, is about a muscular punch. So while it's tempting to say it's the that matters, so I simply create an EQ curve. My pass filter here is set at 35. Now these are quite mild, which is great. So a little bit of roll off not only buys us a little bit more in the way of levels because we're pushing to the middle, remember? And I think I'll try and put up a graphic on this. Push towards the middle. You mix in the middle, not out here. So rolling that off simply gives us a little bit more level to play with, but it helps focus on the middle. We've pushed a little bit here at 5.5, but we've actually rolled off quite a lot at around 15k. So that's why it's a lot warmer. We've focused ourselves into the center. I then simply use this final gain to push up so that I've got, looking at my levels here, the right kind of feel and roughly a 12 dB crest factor. So VU in Reason is set to -12 for the 0 and 0 dB peak and 0 dB VU corresponding to each other. That means the music sort of moves with this 12 dB between the average and the peak, means that we've got good dynamics. If we look at a meter, like my knob around the Evo's got these flashing lights, then we see lots and lots of lovely movement. People will push that until they've got no movement whatsoever, and then it sounds like shite. And then they wonder why their track lacks. It's because it's just, as I said to somebody about one of their compositions, it's basically hot lettuce, because you run at 110% from beginning to end, and it's like hot lettuce. You listen to every single time slice, you listen to 5 seconds here and 5 seconds there, and you go, it's so blammin'. Then you listen to the whole thing and go, fucking hot lettuce. Somebody's melted my lettuce here. It sucks. Because you've just got no dynamic left. So keep a dynamic always. But this is pushing up till you'll tend to find that this is peaks, tiny bit of limiting, but I'm really using the soft clipping to, but in a soft way. This sits, and we'll cover that later. We can check a few things. We can turn our EQ off. Is this better or worse? There's no right or wrong here. I merely made some decisions with our pointless material. Or mono. Now, one of the differences with the track and the master versions is that the track version will just mono, giving you both speakers. The master version will push mono to point source, as into one ear. Horrible on headphones, but we're checking in speakers. One single speaker, traditionally that used to be a little Oratone sitting in the center, but nonetheless point source mono is technically more correct. If that really burns your beans, then you can undo the setting there. But as I said, the track version has it that way. So that's in use, how we make it happen. And I'm going to get rid of all of this in a mo. We'll just listen again. All blammin'. Taking off these, not a huge difference. Bear in mind I did nothing to individualize those tracks. There's no EQ, there's absolutely nothing. And then, so we can say, yep, we get all kinds of from it. Second part of the program, we're going to look at the device in more detail. I have the tape track version here. We have a synth sound. As you hear, when this is there's a sort of hardness. So what we have is this device that you can just drag in and sort of set and forget. Bear in mind it applies the same tonal stuff to everything, which could be a good or bad thing. If you don't want the tonal stuff, simply drag it in. And that's giving you the tapey stuff. We'll put that back on now, we'll dig inside. There are a couple of devices, or if there's a device folded up, don't touch it. We'll come to that in a mo. There are two compressors here. As I said, this is messy, but bearing in mind they can feel different, and I figured people would want this choice, then it's set up this way. So, the signal comes in. It has the ability to be gain staged. If that sounds a little quiet, then you can push it. If it's a little too loud, then you can pull it. There is no right or wrong here. You can also use pans and what have you, that's fine. Width, unless you're deliberately wanting to monoize, don't use the widener more than necessary. Now, a lot of you would go, oh, well, I'll push here on the beginning of my compressor, yeah, but what happens then when you A-B that compressor? You're not getting the same result, which is why there's a push here. When you A-B your compressor, you're only listening to the compressor, not to gains as well. So we see a compressor here and we see a compressor here. You see that I have given a choice. Do we want to compress before we go into tape, or do we want to compress after we've come off tape? There are two different scenarios, and in reality it's not uncommon to compress onto tape and off tape, bearing in mind that tape has a habit of doing some kind of compression itself. You will get slightly different results. You'll get slightly different results from the drive of the tape as well. So there's no right or wrong here. A lot of people like the dramatic of going pre-tape, and post-tape can be a little bit more polite, in part because we've changed our levels a little bit. There is no right, no wrong here. Hence, that's why I've left it this way. So if we go pre-tape or post-tape, the compressors can work exactly the same. I debated about putting the compressor controls on the front, but I'd rather keep people in this than on the front. While it would be easy to create a set of settings, the problem is you're not thinking about it and then you're losing the power of all of these devices. So simply choose, am I wanting to compress pre or post? Normally I would compress post, so I will simply close that up. It's not relevant. Now this is the tape section. The two of these are the tape section. All this is doing is 100% set to wet, and I've set to 8 milliseconds. So yes, it is creating an 8 millisecond delay, which is not compensated for. If you're attaching this to some things and not to others, yes, you will end up with an issue of 8 milliseconds. If that's going to really burn your beans, then you're going to have to do something about that. But what this does is very simple. It simply creates a little bit of wobble. If we overdo it, it's very obvious. If we have it set to anything but 100%, we've now got a chorus, not the plan. The same with adding LFO. We end up with a chorus, and the LFO on the echo is set to stereo. So we want to keep this fairly minimal. I know there's a fashion to be all like drunk and what have you. If that really is that necessary for you, but you know what, tape wasn't that bad. 2% is actually plenty. If you want to be a little drunk, 5% solid, wandering. So it's sort of up to you, but keep this on the lower side. The 8 milliseconds stops this from happening. Hear how you can hear it? Whoa. That's because the wobble goes above and below the initial setting, and at 1 millisecond it goes beyond that. So we will keep to 8 milliseconds because that's the option they give us. And as you hear at 8 milliseconds there, it's perfectly fine. Everything else is off. Feedback is down. While tape can sometimes create a little bit of feedback, I don't want that here. Same with diffusions, filters, limiter. I've pulled this back. While pushing into a limiter whilst using tape echo can definitely be a cool thing. We don't want it happening here. I've kept to as much as possible an even Steven. So this is just quite literally the imperfection of timing from tape. And then it's going through screen. You will hear sort of a lightning from that. That I assume to be the saturation from tape. I have left this fully open. We will deal with tone elsewhere. If we deal with tone too many times, we start to have problems that we can't fix. Like if we say, okay, I'm going to make that. Sounds like it's a good call, but then later we have problems. Because as you see, as you turn that up, it's not nice. If we want that brightness, we can't get it if we've rolled it off. So this is where a lot of people do get dumb. They overdo the former things, meaning the latter things can't work. And if you go back to a lot of cheaper analog equipment, like cheap analog discs, 4-track cassettes and what have you, that was a problem because obviously there was so much quality lost in the tape stage. And then in nasty little compressors that they put in, that by the time you came to trying to EQ boost, all you were doing was boosting yuck. And it just made everything worse than it was before. So no need to make anything worse than we need to. I've allowed, normally I don't, but I have allowed a tiny bit of whatever the compression is that works in here. I can't say that I necessarily like it. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I don't really like it. But I have allowed for it if there is, I'm assuming, a heavy level. Being compressor, one assumes that there's a threshold and it's not working from 0. So that's my tape. I leave them closed myself because why would I move or change them? So we get to this compressor. Again, I've left this on and I have left a setting, which I think should be softer than that, simply because people are not going to understand if the moment they bring it in, it's doing this thing, which is just brutal on pads, obviously. So I've simply let it out to be pretty slow. The fact that there's no threshold means that it's doing nothing. But I will recommend that you pull it down, and again, only a dB or so. Obviously, on a polyphonic synth, it's going to behave very differently from just even a mono synth or a bass line. So we have to take into account that we could be getting all kinds of material, and seeing this as mine, pads and what have you are really common. So again, just go carefully here. Don't hammer things hard. We've got our EQ. Remember, we can turn our EQ on or off here. So we've got our EQ here. I have defaulted this to minus 35 with that on. It just gently rolls off the very bottom, and that is a good thing more often than not. There's no point to that stuff. My subs even struggle to deal with it usefully. And I've just preset, roll off a little bit of bass. This is using the really broad curves. So if you use the F2 window, these curves are these broad ones, not these narrow ones. Now you can change them, obviously, by All we're looking for here is just tonal adjustment. I don't want it to be too bassy. It's tempting to make everything bassy, but I have rolled off here at about 100. Added a bit of a boost at about 500. This can make things rather thick and MIDI, but mid-full, not MIDI as in MIDI sound, no such thing. And then taking off a fair amount at about 3K. 3 to 5K tends to be, or anywhere from 2 to 5K, tends to be where we get that hard, brittle sound. I've left the high highs alone, but we could decide to pull them back as well. And then simply the output. I know that we've probably lost somewhere about 4 dB in this process, so I've put that back there to give you a rough even Steven as you go. Okay, is my sound better now than it was before? Hear how it's naturally warmed a little bit, but there is a little bit more vibrance because of our saturation and our movement from the tape that's going on in here. That's basically it. I have still kept in the limiter running fairly slowly so that if you are really pushing hard, and this is going to get loud, boys and girls, that it will, but you're going to end up with issues elsewhere as it in your mix, because that's going to be really problematic. So try not to do that. Okay, I actually ended up with the wrong. So you can use the limiter and the soft clipping here. It's not a thing I'd rush into too much, because if you start doing clipping for more than necessary things in the mix, when you get to your masters and you're clipping again, remember that's clipping is a form of limiting. So if you've kind of hard limited a lot, say of your drums, your rhythm bass in the mix, and then you're doing a little bit more of it, you could be chopping off, well, 3 dB and then 3 dB again. You'd be taking 6 dB, but at that point it probably feels more like 12. 12 dB of limiting is not kind. So go very carefully here, but it is there. I have provided the minus 0.3 of a dB, so if it is getting into clip territory, it won't clip. So it gives you a fair amount of clip protection, but where there's a will, there's a way. I'm always, as you see, running with the equivalent on my masters. So that's the devices. Remember, there are 2 versions. If you bring them in, just shift drag them in, or drag them in, make sure they're not wired to anything. Then you can, if we just delete that guy there, then we can control drag, keep control down. You've now got a clone. It's not plugged in. Shift drag, make sure the target there. Now it's plugged in. And by keeping them here, then you can just keep spinning them off. And I would recommend use the track version for putting onto individual instruments, and the master one for putting into buses. So if I have a rhythm bus, put that in there. There is really no difference other than that some settings are preset here, which will kind of warmer, and mono goes to just mono. So it still stays way in the center in the mix, and on the masters, mono will go single point source, so it'll move off to one side. Again, horrid if you're working in headphones, but really you should not work in headphones. There are very few reasons to work in headphones. People come up with them, but they are wrong. If you are interested and open-minded to why you may be making an unnecessary mistake, then I have a big video on, well, headphones versus speakers, and talking about the dumb software solutions that people think puts them ahead of the game. You cannot get ahead of the game. We're talking biology here, so we don't want to get ahead of the game because we fool ourselves, because we can't fool ourselves. Alrighty, any questions, any support must be below. You start sending me private messages for this, I'm either going to just ignore and delete or give you a serve here. That way everything is shared. This is shared, so let's make it shared for everyone. Get out there, have a good day.